Well, if you're like me and you like the lyrics of that song sung by Andy Williams, written by Pat Boone, then it's about the last time that you're going to hear it, at least among the last, because I'm told by our social media outreach team that they're tired of hearing it and they want something new. So I'm here to tell you that its time could well be over. Also, our social media queen and her court, that would be Dee and Leah and Jackie, would like me to inform you that I think it's 3 weeks from today's program that we're going to have a question and answer with Yada time, where any question that you submit via social media will be asked on the show. I won't get any advance notice of what the questions are, so it's going to be totally extemporaneous. But if you post your questions on the social media site with Dee at, I'm imagining that you're monitoring both the Twitter site and the Facebook site.
Sure.
That those questions in a few weeks' time will be posed, and we'll try to do a Q&A period like we did long ago in Shattering Myths when Scott Berdink was our program director, and he was on the switchboard, and we were able to take live phone calls. We're actually able to do it in this format. I'm looking at the switchboard now of everybody that has called in. I have their telephone numbers, not the names associated with them. And we could actually ask individuals and here on the switchboard for their questions, but we're going to do it by way of you submitting them to social media, and then I'll do my best to answer them as part of the program.
Cool.
I might be a bit melancholy today. Kirk is played under the weather too. Dee might be fine today. Kirk is battling his 87,000th attempt to pass a kidney stone. So we're hoping that he is on the mend. He is certainly an expert at it now, so we know that he'll do fine.
Practice
he's
makes
had lots
perfect.
he's had lots of practice. And I found out today that I'm on the menu. It's one thing to be included in the menu, but to be the menu, well, I'm sharing the plate with my good friend Dode. It's another story. But turns out that in the proper analysis and translation of the Gog and Magog war, Meshach and Tubal, that Gog is actually Satan. Meshach and Tubal were to be translated, not transliterated, as names of places. Magog means to question Gog, and there is no war. So for those who are expecting a Magog war and trying to pinpoint where Gog and Magog and Meshach and Tubal may be, you can give up on that because they're literary devices. And these literary devices are all designed to reveal Satan at his perceived greatness as he came into the garden to deceive Chawah, and then for him to shed the adversary title that he was given and rise above the diminishment that was the consequence of his indiscretion at the garden. So Gog, like the cherub of Eden, like the cedar of the garden, like the Pharaoh of Egypt, like the king of Tyre, are all metaphors describing Satan in his glory and Satan after the fall, and then used by the Lord of Babel to pummel the adversary title that he must extinguish if he is to be worshipped as God. And so that really is the story of the Gog and Magog war. But the thing that is so astonishing about it is that Satan's great reveal, which is why the story of Gog and Magog told, it is Satan's coming out party, his day of days. likely May 1st, 2030, I think is the time. We don't yet know who will play the role of Hasatan when he enters Jerusalem. Who he has selected for the role, I was thinking that Donald, but he's too old. Certainly can't be the Pope because he's already wheelchair bound. But he'll pick someone to play the starring role. And then he is going to have the Feast of the Beast. And the Feast of the Beast is a celebration of cannibalism and of vampirism, where you eat the flesh and drink the blood of two particular individuals. And the star of the plate is Dode. But I got to find out that as his understudy, I will also be served up on Satan's plate. So
oh, wow.
It's nice to know that I got an attaboy, and
starring role.
We'll be there. We'll be there at the Feast of the Beast, should he prevail, as part of the meal on Hasatan's plate. So those who don't like me very much, you may want to attend, should he prevail. Although I really don't think I would taste very good. Nor do I think that Yahweh is going to allow this to occur. But it is this seventh chapter of Volume 3 of the books on Babel. Volume 1 being on Daniel, Volumes 2 and 3 on the book of Ezekiel. Chapter 7, which is called The Great Reveal, Feast of the Beast. It may be the climax, really, and the culmination of all I've done over the past 22 years. It is it's a startling presentation, gripping, exceedingly enlightening, unbelievably controversial. But I look forward to it being edited. Jackie has edited the first half of it. She'll edit the second half. Mike will do his fact check on the chapter, and then the edit team will review it, and it'll get posted by David on the Yada Yahowah site. And I will tell you, it is a real page starter. It is maybe the most extraordinary experience thus far in writing, and we're 30 books into this at this point.
Wow.
So I'll leave you with that and tell you that should there have been any concern that we might be off on a limb, calling Ezekiel Satan's autobiography, there should be no doubt.
All doubt removed.
Yeah. After reading the 7th chapter, the 6th, this happens to be on the Valley of Dry Bones. That's an exceedingly revealing experience as well, in what it actually discloses. And that's followed, of course, by the 2 chapters in Ezekiel 38 and 39 that were interpreted to describe a Magog war during the last days. And, well, frankly, nothing could be further from the truth. But coming to understand why the name Gog was chosen is quite enlightening. Well, where we ended the program last week was on Hosea 5:5. And God was speaking very critically of his people, particularly Yisrael and Ephraim. Ephraim being a subset of Yisrael. He's not pleased with his people, and he's also contrasting them to Yehudah, which he is also displeased with, but in a slightly different way. This is Hosea 5:5. Moreover, the pride and arrogance of Yisrael testifies against his presence. Therefore, Yisrael, those who contend and struggle with God, and Ephraim, worthless specks of carbon, will falter, stumble and fall, and they will be overthrown. This is kashal. They're going to stagger and will not succeed as a result of being feeble and weak. It was written in the Niphal, imperfect. It says that the northern kingdom constantly stumbled, and their fall was not only their fault, the consequences will be enduring. in their perverse corruptions and their libelous errors. Ba, eron, him. In their depravity, wrongdoing, transgressions, and resulting guilt. Yahudah, which means beloved of Yah, will also waver along with them. This is also kashal, this time followed by gam, which means also, m, which means with, and him, them. They're going to falter in addition to them, staggering and failing to succeed as a result of being weak and even overthrown following them, at least for the moment. It's called perfect this time. Now, one of the many reasons that amplification is an aid to understanding is because otherwise we would miss the implications of the Hebrew stems, the conjugations, and the moods. And in this particular case, the same verb, kashal, which means to stumble and fall, was directed at Yisrael and Yahudah, although with very different implications and consequences, none of which you would pick up if you were not aware of these grammatical enhancements to the Hebrew language. With the niphal stem, Ephraim is responsible for having fallen and will endure the consequence of their own making. You see, the niphal says that the subject both causes the action of the verb and also suffers the effect of it. Very interesting step. Mm-hmm. They made the mess, and they will get to lie in it, with no one to blame but themselves. I wish we had stems in English, although I'd probably be tongue-tied trying to figure out which one to apply. I will tell you that with these stems, if you are not communicating in writing, the ability to convey them orally would be nigh on impossible because of the complexity of what you're trying to communicate. Now, in the imperfect, when directed at Yisrael and Ephraim, there will be no getting up, at least for a very long time. They constantly faltered, so their fall will be continuous. The imperfect speaks of ongoing behavior. Now, when scribed in the perfect and applied to Yahudah, Judah, we discovered that the southern kingdom will actually be overthrown during a finite period of time, and that they will not stay down, suggesting that they will rise again. Facts are true. Mm-hmm. The 10 tribes of Israel remain essentially lost after the Assyrian conquest over 2,700 years ago. And while Yahudah was overthrown by Rome between 66 and 135 CE, the descendants of those who were hauled off into slavery have returned. And it is Yehudim who we refer to as Jews today. Well, that's a lot of insights from stems that most people don't even know exist. I think if you were to ask the 1,000 people who claim that I'll use the term Bible, is the Word of God, if they understand that the Hebrew text of the Torah, prophets, and Psalms included stems that explain the relationship between the subject and object of the sentence pursuant to the action of the verb, that outside of this community, there would be maybe 1 in a million that would even know what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
If you were to tell them that the Hebrew language is like light, and that all time exists, nothing is locked into the past, present, and future. It simply is, as is the case with the nature of light. I was watching a Discovery Channel show on light the other day, and they made the point that on a photon of light, time exists. The past, the present, the future are all one. And that's exactly how Hebrew is written. So in Hebrew, rather than tenses, there are 2 conjugations, ongoing action and completed action. The completed action means that, when like applied to Yehudah, that this is something that will occur or has occurred, but it will not endure forever. With the imperfect conjugation, we learn that the action is ongoing and continual through time. And then, of course, well, it wasn't applied in this case. There are also moods, and the Hebrew moods explain volition, whether volition is being expressed in the first, second, or third person. So it's a marvelous language, and I don't think there's even 1 in a million people who appreciates what can be deduced by examining it more closely. But when we read this sort of thing, we learn that pride begets self-reliance. It is a condition that leads away from trusting Yahweh, because with self-reliance, we're relying upon the ingenuity of me, myself, and I. And no matter how productive and powerful a person or nation might be, no matter how impervious its defenses appear, or how stellar its collective intellect, societies that separate themselves from God quickly find their productivity, power, and pride were all a mirage. They don't last very long. You look at here, because we have the normalcy syndrome. Living, whether it's been a European country or in America, think that, well, because we're special, that we're going to continue to enjoy a superior life.
Be.
Oh, boy. I got news for you. It's all going to come to a crashing halt, and it's going to come down quickly and without warning, at least without warning for those that aren't aware of what Yahweh has told us. So if you're caught up in the normalcy syndrome and think because tomorrow was one way, yesterday was one way, tomorrow will be the same, then I would encourage you just to think about how life was different before COVID and how much it's changed, and how life was different before the war in the Ukraine, and how much it's changed, how quickly things change. So moving on with Hosea, who has a lot to say about how things have changed for God's people. It reads, "Within their flocks and among their herds, they will travel about to search, to inquire about, to seek to hold responsible, and to look to conspire against Yahweh. But they will not achieve what they seek. He is withdrawn from them. They have been untrustworthy and unreliable, have betrayed him, and been treacherous in their dealings with Yahweh." Boy, that is not what you want written of you.
No.
Going about life,
not at all,
trying to find ways to conspire against Yahweh. I mean, God is saying, I don't care what you have to say, what you have to write against me. How you've aggrandized yourselves in your Talmud and your New Testament. I'm not going away. And I'll have nothing to do with it. In fact, while you're doing this and celebrating your Talmud and your New Testament, I'm simply going to withdraw from you. You've not been trustworthy. You've not been reliable. You have betrayed me in treacherous manners. So Yahweh says, I am essentially done with you. Not forever, but for a very long time. For now, they have fathered and brought forth those who are illegitimate and estranged children. So now the crescent moon will devour them along with their land. That's Hosea. He saves 5:7. Strong words. It is definitely not something that you ever want to be said of you, that you are bakash, that you are accountable for rebelling against the authority of Yahweh. You never want it to be said of you that in your life's endeavors that you will not achieve what you seek. But that's what Lo Mata conveys. You never want to read in conjunction with yourself or your people that Yahowah has withdrawn from you. But that's what he did 2,700 years ago with Israel and 2,500 years ago with Yehudah. And these fences are finally being torn down. When God says, you have been Bagad, you betrayed me, you've been treacherous. It's interesting, too, that Bagad means two things. It speaks of being untrustworthy and unreliable, but it also speaks of being attired in religious apparel.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the dominant strain of Judaism today in Israel. The Haredi. And their mourning suits and their black hats and their curly cues on the side of their faces. They are dressed religiously, which Yahowah says speaks volumes to the fact that they have betrayed me and that they're being treacherous in their dealings and that they are untrustworthy. God hates religious dress-up. For now they have fathered and brought forth offspring who are illegitimate. Their children are estranged. And that's what's happened for the past 2,700 years with Yisrael, 2,500 years with Yehudah. God has not spoken through a Yisraelite for 2,700 years, has not spoken through a Yehud, Jew, in 2,500 years. So now the crescent moon will devour them. Boy, I wonder if I could think of something that's represented by the crescent moon that is terrorizing Jews.
Somebody wrote a book on it.
I think so.
Yeah.
In fact, I think it has a crescent moon on the cover of it. Prophet of Doom. Yeah, Islam's terrorist dogma and Muhammad's own words.
Can I throw one little thing in before we
Sure,
pass?
please.
On Bagad, I find it fascinating that Bagad and what you're saying about it was written the way it was written, with the little picture of a bat and then a gimel walking away towards his house, walking away from the doorway to pass over the delet.
Yeah,
delet.
that's true.
I mean,
yeah,
you
the
can't make this
is
stuff
the
up.
home with one way in, and the G is a foot walking away from the doorway of
Left
that
to
home.
right, yes.
Yep.
Right.
And the left is in fact the doorway representing Passover. So this is people walking away from the covenant home and the doorway to life.
Amazing.
You know, these words are interesting. You know, one of the things too that you found when you were analyzing the words that I didn't know until you brought it up was that of the 10, 12 words out of or 10, 12 letters out of the 22 in the Hebrew language are one-sided. They lean from right to left in the direction that Hebrew reads. And one letter actually reads left to right against the flow of Hebrew. That's the G. And it's a foot going in the wrong direction. And what you learned is that when the letters that are directional face away from the letters in Yahweh's name, the Yod, the Wah, and the He, that the word is decidedly negative in terms of its implications. And when the letters that are directional point towards the letters in Yahweh's name, that the word is exceedingly positive as it relates to its influence upon us. But it appears that in Bagad, that since none of those three letters are in Yahweh's name, the Gimel, the Be'eth, the Daleth, that just the idea that the Gimel is walking away from the home, the covenant, that this is trouble. Now, it's actually walking towards the door because it precedes the left. But the problem here is just like Christianity. If you walk away from the original covenant towards Passover, and you have ignored and have not benefited from matzah, where your soul is de-leavened, it's the worst possible outcome, because you would have eternal life but be unperfected in terms of your soul, which means that you would have to be eternally estranged from God, which means an everlasting fate and Sheol. Yeah. So this actually suggests that sort of thing. So a lot can be learned from the letters that were originally used to write these words. So the Israelites have flocked together more than any other race or cultural group, even when exiled from their homeland. Therefore, it is more instructive to view Ba-Sion, the flock, with the flock, and Ba-Bakar from this perspective, presenting the herd mentality of Israel, than it is to continuously view them as sheep herders. Having migrated throughout Europe together and to the New World, then encountering anti-Semitism wherever they have gone, rabbis have sought to hold God accountable, deception, and their subsequent torment. But in all of this time, and in all of their ways, they're no closer to the truth and are further from Yah than ever before. And while they have rebelled against his authority, the consequence is to be excluded from the ensuing harvest. And that surely was not the intent. So they have withdrawn from Yahweh, and so God has removed his presence and his witness from Israel. You know, I'm about to begin. There are 3 chapters of Ezekiel, 40, 41, and 42, that are pedantic relative to the grand scale of the revisionist temple that the Lord of Babel wants to have built. And, you know, it's obvious that on first blush that it is bigger and grander because, well, Satan needs to be better than Yah. A more simple home was good enough for the Father of the covenant and the creator of life. He doesn't need to gloat, but it has to be a grand edifice for Satan. And so I was reading the rabbinical reviews because before you get into something like this, you know they have had some commentary, because one of the interesting things about this whole thing is that the plans that Yahweh provided in the Torah for the dimensions of his home and its construction are contradicted in every possible way in these 3 chapters of Ezekiel. So I wanted to see what the rabbi's take was on this. So I brought up a number of rabbinical sites, and they say, well, just as the first temple was different than the second temple, we should expect the third temple to be different as well. And they said, as for the differences between them, well, when Elijah comes, he will explain them to us. So I spent after completing the chapter, preceding chapter, I spent a couple of hours today preparing my mind for what's going to come as I write about these changes without boring the poor reader to death, because there's just no way I'm going to translate every word of 3 chapters that are a bunch of numbers regarding the temple. I really just want to present what's going on here. And so I did turn to them to see what their take was. And their presentation, of course, is that it doesn't matter, that Elia will explain it, and that just as there was a difference between 1 and 2, there will be a difference in 3. So what I wanted to find out is there's 2 books that were written contemporaneous with the building of the second temple. Ezra's one, and Nehemiah's the other. And I want to see, did Yahowah provide any instructions that would contradict the original instructions that he had provided through Moshe and then on through Dode in the construction of his first home? And the answer is no. So any difference between the first and the second is strictly humans ad libbing. The second thing that I wanted to find, and therefore, if that's the case, then any difference between the dimensions of the one and only temple that God designed and Ezekiel's are wrong in Ezekiel. The second thing I wanted to find is there any justification for calling Ezra inspired by God?
No.
I'm not here to tell you that Ezra is like Ezekiel or Enoch and was inspired by Satan. That's clearly not the case.
He was a scribe.
It reads as a historical scribe that is saying, here's the events that took place, and this is what happened to us. This is what Cyrus said, and then there were a group that were conspiring, and so Darius halted the construction, and there were a bunch of letters that went back and forth between the two parties because construction was halted after the foundation was laid, and that our overseer was actually a Babylonian with a Babylonian name, and he went and did what he was supposed to do until we were told to stop, and we stopped for a bunch of years, and then we started again, and here we go. It's a nice history, but there's not a single prophecy in it, and therefore, without prophecy, one cannot claim that it was inspired by God. Now, it's interesting that the Dabadim test is only of those who claim to be a prophet. So if Ezra came out and says, I'm a prophet, and here's my book, and there's no prophecies, if he presents himself as a scribe, and there are no prophecies, then he's not a false prophet, but there's also no proof that the book was inspired by Yahowah. Therefore, if he states something, it is subject to human error and to interpretation. Nehemiah is the same thing. Haggai, who exists only to tell us that, here's the cast of characters that were assigned the task of building the second temple. There are no prophecies in it either.
Right.
So, the sad thing for him is that it is claimed of him that he was a prophet, and therefore without prophecies he would be a false prophet. So it's going to be interesting. I'm going to read through each of these books again, validate that they are simply scribal and historical, in which case there are no instructions to do anything different, and also to see if there is any mention of something different, which thus far I've not seen, indicating that what Ezekiel is claiming is totally spurious and is simply Hasatan, the adversary, trying to one-up Yahowah and be seen above him because his temple is bigger and grander. So interesting as you relate to these individuals, what you can determine based upon their status with Yahowah. And if this analysis proves true, we've proven that Daniel wasn't a prophet, we've proven that Ezekiel wasn't a prophet, and it certainly appears that Ezra was a scribe, not a prophet, and Nehemiah was not a prophet, and Haggai was not a prophet. Esther, clearly not prophetic, not inspired. Ecclesiastes, not prophetic, not inspired. Solomon, not prophetic, not inspired. Maccabees, same thing. Obviously, Enoch, neither a prophet nor inspired.
Right.
We are really getting down to the point where there weren't a whole lot of prophets. Yeah. So, you're left with Moshe. You do have Yahowah through unknown individuals, so they're not prophets, but conveying prophecies and Malachim Kings and Words for the Day Chronicles. So we do see some prophetic statements in them, but they're mostly historical accounts. And Shamuel, clearly a prophet. Dode, overwhelmingly a prophet. And Zechariah, Malachi, obviously my favorite, Yashayah, Yirmiah. But we don't have a lot of them. The book of Job presents Satan exactly as one would deduce his profile and personality based on the story of as it's presented in Ezekiel. You know, he was envious, went to God and say, plays a starring role here. You know, they only like you because you do nice things for them. If you didn't do nice things for them, they wouldn't like you anymore. And that's basically Satan taunting God and discrediting humankind, which is what we read throughout Ezekiel. So there aren't a lot of prophets. Now, that's an interesting thought here, too, because Hosea, clearly a prophet. Does this mean, A, that God had a very difficult time finding people who were willing to listen to him and speak for him?
Without doubt.
B, did he find exactly the number of people and the right people to listen to him and speak through, and the likes of, Moshe and Yosha ben Nun and Shamuel and Dode and Yashayah, Yirmiah, Hosea, et al. And that was all he thought was necessary to convey. He conveyed it, and there we have it. More than any dozen of us could possibly translate and comprehend and analyze and plumb for its depths over a lifetime. So I guess that would be the second option.
That's the answer. That's a good answer.
Yeah, don't know which one of those two. Maybe it's both.
Maybe I was going to say I'd go with both.
Yeah, but there's not a lot of them. I mean, it's really going to get down to, okay, there's a lot of prophecy in the Torah. There's a lot of prophecy in Shamuel. There's prophecy interspaced between the historical accounts and Malachim Kings and its mirror account in Chronicles, Words for the Day. And certainly the great prophet Yashayah and Yirmiah and Hosea, Zechariah, Malachi. And there was prophets who didn't have books named after them, Eliah.
Mm-hmm.
But my goodness.
And Nathan.
Not very, Deborah was both a prophet and a judge. Nathan was a prophet, didn't have a book named after him either.
And Amos, he actually says he's not a prophet, even though he's called one by the king. So that's one to look at, too.
Yes. Yeah. But we really have an interesting review ahead. I have already told Jackie, who leads the editing team and is the lead publicist for the Yada Yah series, that after we finish Ezekiel, which I hope to finish over the next 3 or 4 weeks, that I'm taking a break. And my break isn't I'm going on a sabbatical. My break is that I decided I'm going back to the Mizmor. I'm going to start picking up where Volume 2 of Coming Home left off, which I think was right around the 23rd Mizmor song. And I'm just going to spend some time with Dode. We're going to translate some Psalms. And if it doesn't speak about the last days, so what?
Good stuff to listen to.
Yeah, you've got more than enough in this material we have done here recently to understand what's coming.
Yep.
So
I'm excited about that.
Yeah, it's going to be a nice transition.
Yeah.
To know Yah is to strive to be like Him, to see the world as He views it. to reflect his redeeming attributes. Yahweh is trustworthy, he is reliable, and therefore he seeks the same in us. So when people he has assisted betray him, he is none too pleased. And in the case of Yisrael, their response to God has been particularly treacherous. I mean, right at the beginning, look, I mean, it starts actually with Abraham, who is the human father of the covenant. I mean, what a scallywag. He was married to such a wonderful woman, you know, one of the greatest women to have ever lived. Beautiful, yeah. Charming, intellectual. And she had it all. And yet, he pimped her out twice to enrich himself. So it doesn't begin well.
No.
And Jacob, he was also a scallywag.
Indeed.
He was more wrong than right for most of his life.
Yeah.
And then you get to the whole episode of selling Joseph off to into slavery and abandoning him the way that Jacob's sons did. And then you see the way that they responded to Moshe when Moshe reached out, risked his life and standing to protect them, and the first thing they did was betray him.
Yeah.
And then you see the way they acted during the Yatza Exodus. I mean, they were hardly out of Egypt, Mitzrayim, before they were making idols to worship in lieu of God. They bellyached the whole way, complained the whole way, grumbled the whole way. And when he finally brought them to the promised land, they said, no, we're not going in there. It's too scary. I mean, good God, what a bunch of crybabies. They were awful. And there is no time when you can say, well, Jews were wonderful. I mean, the best you got is during the years under Dode. Not the years under Shaul, Saul. He, too, was a scumbag. Got his head handed to him, literally.
Yeah.
And was demon-possessed. And, well, Dode is the best among us. In terms of some of the things he did, he was no prize.
There's hope for me.
He responded improperly a bunch of times. Yeah. And Israel was not glorious under his reign. Yeah, there was a civil war, for example. Enemies were trying to tear him apart from all sides.
Mm-hmm.
Huge family disputes.
Oh, yeah.
And his son, oh my God. I mean, his son was way, way too into the ladies in his life and never met a pagan that he didn't love. And it took him right down the rabbit hole into Sheol. And within a few years, Israel was divided. The Assyrians came knocking on the door and hauled 10 of the 12 tribes into oblivion, historical oblivion. And then thereafter, Yehudah was pummeled, not once but twice, by the Babylonians.
Yeah.
And as soon as the Babylonians were done with them, it was the Greeks. And the Greeks had hardly become Romans before the Romans hammered them 3 times. And then after the Romans, there was the Roman Catholic Church. And after them, it was the Muslims. And after them, it was fascist Europe. Yeah. Now it's the progressives. It's never been glorious. I mean, look now at Israel. They finally had an election where they could form a government, and they're on the cusp of civil war. It's never been good. And I think that's essential when we recognize that God all this time has remained loyal to his people, but the only way that he could endure them was to have a timeout from them. You know, I remember the years towards the end of my my marriage with my ex, that the only way that I could survive it was to have many homes. I could always be at a home that she was not. And that's kind of like Yahweh's approach here. It's just, this works if we're nowhere close to one another. And, we'll figure this out in the end. Yahweh's a lot better than me, and he wasn't married to someone with borderline personality disorder, so it was resolvable. But
it's tough.
This is what God is saying, that he's none too pleased. In the case of Yisrael, he essentially estranged himself because of their treachery. His invitations, they ignored. His land, they corrupted. And it all reflected poorly on God, because he had chosen these people to represent him. And when this kind of behavior exists by people who are seen flocking together by their choice of bizarre and mournful religious outfits, it implies that they're miserable, that their lives are somehow a result of being betrayed by their God, being rejected by him or rejecting him. And it does not speak well of them, and it's embarrassing to God. Raising their sons and daughters to be religious, the Haredi have fathered illegitimate and alienated children who are estranged from Yahweh. This is why the Assyrians were allowed to have their way with them. This is why they were hauled off into captivity, 722 BCE. This is why they were taken to a geographical area that was ultimately plagued by Islam, the religion that marauds under the sign of a crescent moon. They would lose their land to Muslims as well as their right to live. Their possessions have been devoured by Muhammad's barbarians. And this is why shalak is such a provocative term in this context. In conjugation with the call to be devoured, it reveals that Allah's little helpers consumed their land and took their territory, such that the Israelites were devoured as a result of their seductive words, those found in the Babylonian Talmud, and then based upon their recitals of the Talmud in the Quran. Killing them would secure a jihadist fate and serve to provide virginal rewards in paradise. Some or all of this was foretold via Chalek, and yet it is another example of why we prefer amplification where every reasonable connotation is considered. We learn so much more. There are thousands of words Yahweh could have chosen instead of Kodesh to illustrate the source of Yisrael's and, by extensions, America's torment. I include America because throughout Hosea, Yosha's audience has been Yisrael. And there is nearly as many of God's chosen people in America as there are in Israel. The Kodesh, or renewing moon, has been the symbol of Islam since the beginning. Muslims have attacked and they will continue to terrorize and kill Jews because it is Allah's highest calling to murder them. Muslims are incapable of creating anything, but they are perfectly suited to devour the wealth of other nations, wiping them out, burning, destroying, and causing great devastation. Now, Islam wasn't the first satanic religion to slaughter God's people under the sign of a crescent moon. The Hastings Encyclopedia of Religion says, Allah is a pre-Islamic name corresponding to the Babylonian god known as Bel, Bel, like Baal, means Lord, and is a title of reverence to the moon god Sin. That is what we learn when we read the history of Babylon during the time that the Jews were first taken there. Part of the reason they became susceptible to Cyrus is because the king had an affinity for Sin, where the people still preferred Marduk, but Sin was the moon god. So by using Kodesh, Yahweh revealed what would fall, or befall, I should say, his estranged and scattered children. Even the name of Hoshea's unfaithful wife, Gomer, fits the model. Gomer, we are told in the book of Ezekiel, is part of the Magog Federation. Now, this too is problematic because when you look at the countries that the Lord of Babel will claim, formed part of the Magog Federation, there's only one of them that is really knowable, and that is Paros, which is thought to be Persia, even though Persia didn't exist at the time of that writing, so it's an interesting choice of names. But we're also told that there were contributors from Gomer, and the House of Grief was another. So if we look at those places, Gomer was actually is a small little community centered around where Tbilisi is today, in the Caspian steppe. And to include them in this federation is laughable because in the entire Georgian military, which is surrounds where Gomer would have been, there are 37,000 troops. If they all came to do battle, they would be a laughable assembly. And then you have the House of Grief, which is probably indicative of Armenia. And while they have closer to 97 or 90,000 soldiers, that is a country that can ill afford to send anybody out to fight anyone. I mean, they have been subjugated and pummeled by the Babylonians, by the Persians, by the Mongols, by the Muslims, and it just goes on and on. They were also subjected to the control of the Soviets. They have been pummeled by the Turks. So it's an interesting assemblage of nations, and when you find out that they aren't actually places at all, it's just that Hasatan isn't very creative, and to come up with the names to fill out his story, he almost always went to the same well, which was the descendants of Noach. The only exception from the descendants of Noach is Gog, and we learn of Gog that he was a descendant of the disenfranchised and the disinherited of Israel. Jacob's firstborn, Reuben, was disenfranchised. He was disinherited because of his indiscretion in his father's bed with his father's woman. And it is very much like what Satan did in the Garden of Eden. And so Gog is a descendant of Reuben. Reuben actually means malevolent child. And so that's the only name that doesn't come from Noach's descendants, is Gog, and he is a descendant of the malevolent son who was disenfranchised and disinherited because of his indiscretion with his father's woman. It is an interesting story of names. So speaking of that time, we now turn to Hosea 5:8. It reads, "Blow the shofar upon Ha-Gibah, the hill. The clarion in Ramah, the heights. Signal an alarm and shout for joy, Ruah, at Beth Awon, the house of trouble. It is the end for you as the other, O Benjamite. Ephraim, worthless specks of carbon, will be horrified and desolated, which will occur in the day of rebuke and punishment among the various tribes of Israel, those who contend and struggle with God. At that time I will make Yada known to be sure. Yes, exactly. That was my sentiments. Blow the shofar, and it's hard to miss the blowing the shofar and signal the alarm and shouting for joy, Ruah. The connection with Teruah. And
yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
We are, Yada Yahowah is the living embodiment of Teruah. 22 years ago on Teruah is when Yahowah, whom I didn't even know at the time, asked me to do what we are doing. We've been the expression of Teruah ever since. Our entire existence is to share with the house of Yisrael, with Yahudah, what Yahowah has conveyed, that he is returning, that he's coming back with Dod, the Messiah and Son of God, David, and that he is returning on Yom Kippurim, the Day of Reconciliations in 6,000 Yah, which is October 2nd in 2033. And that Yisrael has, exactly as Hosea has said, it has been belligerent with Yah, trade Yah, acted treacherously against him, and therefore has been estranged, but that Yahowah wants to reconcile that relationship. And while the vast majority of Jews will not listen to him, neither the progressives nor the ultra-Orthodox religious, there are those of you in the middle that are not religious, that are not overtly political, that are open-minded, that strive to be rational, who actually want to know Yahweh's name and what he is offering and what he is requesting in return. And for you, Yada Yahowah exists. All 30 books, free on the shelf at yadayah.com for you to read. And so we would encourage you to do that. That is our mission. We were called on Teruah to shout out this warning and to point you in the right direction, to share the good news. So when you read that, the first thing that we hear is celebrate Teruah. Celebrate the purpose of Teruah. Now, if you're a religious Jew, you don't even know what I'm talking about. You don't even know what Teruah means. You've never even heard of Teruah. Why?
Read the Torah.
Goddamn rabbis decided that they didn't want to listen to what Yahowah had to say. They had no interest in attending a festival feast that he was holding. They would prefer to celebrate the Babylonian New Year, and so you usher in your high holy days with Rosh Hashanah, a direct replacement for Teruah. And one of many reasons that God hates Judaism. And if that were not enough, you have turned the Day of Reconciliations into the Day of Atonement, where you afflict your soul, the opposite of what Yahowah intended. You never, ever mention or write his name. Shame on you. And so the purpose of Teruah is to change that, at least for those who are receptive to Yahowah. So that those of you who are not religious, for those of you who are not political, and are interested in knowing God and being part of his family, we exist as a celebration and an extension of the shofar, of Ruah, the basis of Teruah, the fifth of Yahowah's 7 Moed Mikres, the next to be fulfilled. In fact, we are the living fulfillment of it at this very moment. Signal an alarm. Shout for joy. Where? The place the message needs to be heard. The home of trouble. It's the end for you, Benjamin. What does that mean? Well, there were two Shauls. The wannabe king, who rebelled against Yahweh and had his head chopped off, losing in a battle to the dreaded Philistines. He was replaced by the Son of God, the Messiah, King Daud. The other is the wannabe apostle, the man who claimed that the entire Greek Gentile world was given to him exclusively, and that he alone had the right and the authority to contradict God and to establish a new religion, a new covenant, a gospel of grace. And he, even having admitted that he was demon-possessed, controlled by Satan, either wrote or inspired almost all of the Christian New Testament. Shaul became Paul, changed his name from question him to a Latin name, Paulos, because he wanted to celebrate the fact that he was a Roman, even though he was a Jew. It's the end of the Benjamite, which means it is the end of Israel's rebellion. Saul was a Benjamite. He was not a Yehud. Shaul Paul was a Benjamite, not a Yehud. It's the end of that rebellion. Ephraim, worthless specks of dust, he will be horrified and desolated, which will occur in the day of rebuke and punishment. Hosea was written right around 750 BCE. 722 BCE, there was no more Ephraim. Gone. Unknown to history, lost in the land that would become Islam. At that time, he says, I will make Yada known to you. We started this Towrah mission 22 years ago, initially under my own name because I felt it was important for credibility's sake to write Tea with Terrorists about my meeting with Al-Qaeda and Prophet of Doom, the book that brings Islam to you in Muhammad's own words, takes the hadith, the historical accounts that were the first written about Muhammad, and uses them to reorder the Quran chronologically and set them into the context of Muhammad's life. I wrote that under my own name, as I wrote my meeting with Al-Qaeda and Tea with Terrorists under my own name. But once we moved away from exposing Satan's role in religion and on to Yada Yahowah, I was anonymous for the first 10 years, wrote under the pen name Yada. And so Yada is the name that I thought I chose, turns out I didn't, to convey what I was learning from Yahowah in a manner that was as anonymous as possible, because I didn't think I mattered. Only what Yahowah said mattered.
Exposed now.
Come to find out that's not how Yahowah works. The people who speak for him matter.
Yes.
And he speaks vociferously of them. And as it turns out, he had a lot to say about this fellow, Yada, and what he would do for him and alerting God's people and calling them home, of shouting this message as loudly as Ruah would allow. And so for God to say, and at that time, I will make Yada known to be sure. It reads, Yada Aman. That would also mean that I will acknowledge that Yahweh is being truthful. He's reliable, dependable, and enduring. Yada is Hiphil perfect. Hiphil perfect means that God will act at a certain point in time to acknowledge and make known that Yada, which is in the Niphil participle, that he carries out and receives the benefits of being reliable in a highly descriptive manner. Now that's as good as it gets.
It's very reassuring.
Talking about God being as bad as it gets. This is as good as it gets. Yeah, and here are stems and conjugations being used that are explicit. I mean, the Hiphil stem, that means the subject enables the object. God is the speaker, he's the subject, enables the object, Yada, to participate in the action of knowing such that he will serve as a secondary subject or understudy. I know it's a lot of grammatical gobbledygook, but what it says is that Yahweh is enabling Yada to know and to serve as his understudy. Powerful. And then with Aman and the Niphil participle, the Niphil stem means, because now Yada is the subject, that the subject of the verb both carries out the action and benefits from it.
Right.
And since the action of Aman is to be truthful, to be reliable, to be dependable, it means that these things are both being carried out by and experienced by Yada. And in the participle, it means that this is happening in a highly demonstrable manner. You can argue all you want. Say, well, it's reading too much into it. Okay.
No, I don't think so.
I would go ahead and have you look up. You've done it, Kirk. In fact, you had a period where you really got into the stems and tried to, because it takes a while. I mean, I'm going to tell you that you don't become comfortable with the stems and this understanding that everything that Yahweh writes in terms of the actionable nature of his language is subjected to a relationship between the subject and object of the action in every sentence.
Right.
Every sentence. And so you can ignore that or you can embrace it. And if you embrace it, you can learn from it. And there is no one who's going to tell you anything different about the Hiphil stem, which was on Yada, or the Niphil, which pertains to Aman, and their influence on the action of both knowing and being truthful. You studied them. That's what they mean.
Yep. Me too. I've studied them, and that is what they mean. And I've seen you all over the place, so you're not reading into it.
Hundreds of places. But I didn't think I would be on the plate as dinner at the Feast of the Beast. I suppose that's an honor in a way. Never always thought it would be an honor to share a plate with toast.
Main dish.
I'm not sure I wanted to be on the plate with toast, but nonetheless,
well, it's so important for us to know we found the right person to listen to. That we need to know this, and the Torah gives us everything. Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's reassuring.
The more we find that Yahweh has reemphasized this, the more it is reassuring for all of us. For myself, it was extremely uncomfortable. I'm much like being the anonymous Yada. Loved it for 10 years. And so the first time we came upon the realization that there was a choder, and that the choder was a stem off of the old trunk, the branch that was the fallen Yisrael, and that he, not having a lot going for him prior to this engagement, was given the full McGillicuddy of Yahweh's capabilities, and that he has 7 spirits of Yah enabling him and educating him and empowering him to do this job. And then we learned about the knacker from Solomon and the dedication of Yahweh's home, and how this enlightened foreigner would play an exceedingly important role in the end to call God's people home, and how he is referred to as the Bashar, the witness, the Tsar, which is the viceroy, if you will, of Dode, the assistant to the king that does the work that kings can be kings. They don't want to have to do some of the heavy lifting, and so they have go-tos, and so the Tsar is a go-to. Yahweh has lots of terms, including referring to him as the little z, as I call it, the Zeroah. The Zeroah is one who sows the seeds that take root and grow. Moshe and Dode are the great Zeroah, as is Yosha. But turns out there's a little z as well. It's all over. It permeates Yahweh's testimony. It's presented more in Yirmiyah probably than any place else, but it actually begins in the Torah and works all the way through Zechariah and Malachi and through all of Yahweh's prophets. This is an exceedingly important mission to Yahweh. Yes. It's not a prophetic mission because he's already revealed everything he do prophetically. It's a Ruah mission, which is to shout out the message.
Shout it out, tell it.
The lingua franca of the world that is spoken by and understood by more of God's people than the other, including Hebrew. And so
there we have
that is what we're here doing.
But that was why I thought so much about you as a witness also, because you're the only one that knows the modern situations as well as anyone, from economic to religious to whatever. You've written books and books and books on all of that. Plus you have the command of English. I mean, you've got to. Are you kidding? It has to be you. Even if you made it pretty plain, you didn't have to. All you got to do is read it. But
my fifth grade English teacher would be calling at.
But when you write it, you write it well, though.
Saying this guy that fought English grammar can't be now talking about Hebrew grammar. He has no credibility on that subject at all, and I would agree with him. That's why there were 7 Ruach presented to make this possible.
Got you surrounded.
Right. Yeah.
So that's the whole point of it all, is that it's not really about, it's about you, but it's about Yahweh doing this through this message that he's sending through you. And that's, it all points back to Yahweh. You're not getting credibility for yourself, but you are credible.
No, it's not a new prophecy. It's not a new prophecy in it. It's all there.
That said, there still is more to it, and that Yahweh is a team player. He does not work alone.
Yes.
And he gives a lot of rope and a lot of support to those he works with. Debarim is Moshe's analysis
commentary
of what's important in the Torah. I mean, imagine you delineated the first 4 books to him and let him go with Debarim, which is his commentary on the Torah. You gave Dode your anointing and your spirit, and inspired him to write these magnificent songs, but you let him express himself. God likes working through people. He just does. And he lets those people express themselves as they come to understand it. Now, there's a difference between being a Yashaya and a Moshe and a Dode, which is, as prophets, everything you say has to be accurate. In the witness role, you have to be consistently accurate in conveying what those prophets have revealed to us. So it is a different role, but even then, he gives us an enormous amount of latitude. And I think he does that because God realizes that he expressed to the children of Israel remains true even to this day. When he came up with the idea, he told Moshe, he says, they're going to question this idea of me speaking to you, and you know, that's pretty far-fetched. You go up to the top of the mountain, it's all glowing and not consumed with the glowing. You walk down, your face is beaming with light. You have these 12 tablets that I wrote with my own hand. You have this magnificent book that explains creation all the way up to this moment. We've performed all of these great miracles together in liberating the children of Israel. But I can still see the nature of these people. They're going to question whether or not it is really me who is speaking to you. So we're going to get them all assembled, all in their, Shabbat best, and then I'm going to appear right there, and I'm going to affirm right in front of all of Israel that I, God, am speaking through you, Moshe. And what do the children of Israel say?
Freaked out.
Please stop. Don't do this anymore. You're scaring us to death.
Mm.
And God, rather than saying, you ungrateful ingrates, after all I've done for you, you want me to go away?
Yeah.
But God had a very mature, very responsible, very intellectual, emotionally attuned response to them. He says, you're right. The last thing I want to do is to cause you to be afraid of me. The last thing I want to do is to be so bold in presence in your life that you have no choice but to accept me. This is not the right way. The right way is for me to convey my message through someone who is willing to listen to me, think about what I have to say, be responsible, and devote his or her life to conveying this message to educate you. That's the best way, because that gives you the choice to listen to him or ignore him. That is the best choice, because he's going to interpret what I have to say in a way that will resonate with you because he's one of you. I can speak to the political and the religious of Israel and the world because I once was political and religious. Moshe was chosen by Yahweh and was the only person on the planet that could do the job he wanted done, because it was the only person who knew the politics and the religion and the economics and the militarism of Egypt, of Mitzrayim, and had decided to stand up to it, against it, and walk away from it. That's what made him the right person to do the job. Now, my job is not even a billionth as important as Moshe's, but the same exact characteristics apply. So in this way, God is actually saying, the person I choose to communicate through does matter. They have attributes, they have insights, they have backgrounds that are actually pertinent to the message I am conveying through them. True of me?
I stand corrected.
True of Dode. And one of the reasons why I say, since Dode is the beloved of Yah, the chosen of Yah, the man that he anointed 3 times, the man he is returning with to lead his people into eternity, that it would be really smart of us to get to know him really well and to try to bring into our own lives the attitudes and aptitudes, the focus, the life, the message of Dode. Because we know Yahweh says it's right. We know that Yahweh loves him. We know that Yahweh finds him to be the ideal person to work with and through. So if you want, please, to put me out in retirement, please do. And the way you can do that is to learn as much as you possibly can about Dode, David, and implement his and use his as an exemplar. That's how you can do it. Study the Torah like he did. write about the things of God. Speak of them. Live them. Learn that it doesn't much matter if you're good or bad. What matters is if you're right. And Dode was right.
Yep.
You know, I was just thinking, if I may, you read off a list of what attributes of Dode. You know, he's the beloved, he's the shepherd king, or the king, or the shepherd, he's the Masiyag, the branch, the firstborn prophet. And then I was thinking about Shaul. Shaul, if you have any concerns about your religion and you're a Christian, this the great rabbi, he is the father of lies, plague of death, and son of evil.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's pretty incredible.
You pick them. Yeah. Nobody says that anywhere else. Yahweh said it, but nobody picks up on it.
Yeah. It's interesting because I know that Craig doesn't want to make it about himself, but it is nice to look and say, this is the guy that Yahweh chose to work with right now, and we're allowed to acknowledge that and be reassured that we're on the right path. I think we've lost Craig.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. What were you going to say? I'm sorry.
Well, no, I was going to say when we started finding these things in earnest, it was all like we realized that, it's not only that he did it, but it's not. He started recognizing. I thought the first one that really grabbed me more than any of them was the one when it was funny. It's the dedication to the temple. We were talking about the temple earlier, and Solomon. He makes this thing is now he's got all of Israel. Every tribe is there.
Right.
He says, when y'all return, I don't think he said y'all, but when we return, well, no, you got to be listening to this speech. He says, when we return, well, first of all, they ain't going anywhere, so they don't know what he's talking about. He must have sounded crazy to them. When he returned, and he talks about Yada. He talks about a man, a goy, from a different country, a foreigner. He's not Jewish. He's not Israelite. Any of the DNA. And when he returns, this is how it'll happen. So right away, so you got to find that person. So you start putting it all together, and if not this person, Yada. If not this, who? We have 6.5 years till Towrah, the real Towrah.
Right.
Where is it going to come from? Who is going to write this stuff? Craig hasn't written. He's a wonderful writer, and his insights are unbelievable insights that are there that no one's been able to pick up on. I mean, that's a remarkable thing. But this is a translation.
Right.
It was so confusing as a Christian. I'm sure it was confusing. Anyone who's reading Jewish writings and things that are not the Torah, they just don't. You can't figure it out. And he said, I'm going to leave you for 2,700 years, and here we are. And I
was stunned to see a couple chapters back. It said Yada Yahowah right in the text of Hosea. And I asked Craig, is this where you got it from? And he said tonight, I thought I named myself. And it's so incredible, like this journey of watching the organic progression of Yada as he becomes aware of who he is and is revealing it. And Shlomo said he would return Yisrael to using Yahweh's name, and that's exactly the methodological approach he's used. Very logical, very reasoned. So, really reassuring.
Is he going to come back online? I assumed it was.
No, I don't think so. It shows that we're disconnected. I don't even know if we're live at this point.
Oh, okay. just between while we're talking, and I've been studying a lot about Russia's situation and the Ukrainian war.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that could lead to a nuclear war, and millions and millions of it. I spent a lot of time yesterday reading about about 8 or 9 page document. No, it's more than that. It's probably about 12-page document on China, and it's falling apart. It's funny. We started the program with empires don't last. Which everybody knows that studies history. But America is falling on extremely hard times. Now there's things that just can't be maintained. However, I was reading about China. My God, this is such an evil place, and it's so and it's falling apart. Aging, there's population decrease. You can't maintain it. Their policy with killing little girls, little female babies, with this one-child thing has doomed them. They can't get out of this thing, so that empire is dying. The Soviet Union died. That was an empire.
Right.
And the Russian country, as such, is still regurgitated. But on and on and on. But America can't survive this thing, and none of them, not one place do you go, does anyone care about Yahweh. They don't know his name. They don't know his plan. They don't know the simplest basic parts. I mean, I don't know where I'd be without this. I am so happy.
I agree with you. This is vital to my life at this point, and I don't know where I'd be without it. And nowhere good. That's for certain.
Yeah.
Well,
but I don't view.
I see that.
So it's time coming
Pardon?
up. Is the time ending?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, I see Craig has noted that the show has ended, and I just wanted to remind everybody to send their Q&A questions to the social media messenger or email, and wonderful idea by Leah. So I guess I'm out, Kirk. I hope you have a great Shabbat.
You too. Shalom, shalom.
Shalom, shalom, brother.
Bye-bye.
Hi. Bye-bye.